so much for having me. We're talking about cities, and you can think about cities as these series of overlapping systems, and each system is incredibly complex. We heard about the analogy to a human body, and that makes a lot of sense. There's multiple systems in a human body. There's the respiratory system and the circulatory system and the muscular system, and they all are layered on top of each other, and they all work together, and it's the same with the city. And one of the biggest systems in any given city, in terms of the number of people involved, in terms of the dollars moving through it, is the food system. How are the residents of a city fed? Where is that food produced? How is it distributed? Where is it sold? It's incredibly complex. So what I'd like to do today is a thought experiment to think, what does the food system in this city, in San Francisco, look like in 10 years? It'll certainly be different than it is today. And I'd like to imagine two possible futures of what it could look like. But first, just very briefly, let's talk about what the food system looks like today. A food system is incredibly complex in a city, and you can actually think about it as around a dozen systems roughly corresponding to the aisles in a grocery store. So the way fresh fruit and vegetables are produced, distributed, and sold is different than meat and cheese and dairy and eggs and pickles and jams. They each have their own types of producers, their own supply chains, their own refrigeration requirements, their own retail environments. It's incredibly complex, lots of different players, trucking systems, distribution hubs, very heterogeneous system. And what's interesting about the system today is that around 99% of the food that we buy is produced and distributed at a national level. Local food, food produced in the community, in the city, or in the region where you buy it, bought directly from the producers, makes up around 1% of the food that we buy. And this is a massive system, so you're talking about $5 to $7 billion of local food per year in this country, and a $500 to $700 billion grocery industry. Okay, that's where we are today. So let's talk about two potential futures. And what's interesting about these two potential futures is that the seeds for each of them already exist in the world today. Either of these narratives could happen based on existing trends. So trend number one, future number one, is that 10 years from now, this city buys the majority of its food from supercenters. Supercenters like Walmart, Target, Costco, places where you can go and buy anything you need at once. Imagine that the majority of our food comes from those places. It's actually interesting, this very weekend as we speak, Target is opening up its first store in the city. Imagine that 10 years from now there's 5 Targets, and there's 3 Walmarts, and 5 Costcos, and of course they each sell groceries as they do nationally. Talk about the trend. In 1998, Walmart sold 6% of the groceries in this country. Last year in 2011, it sold 25% of the groceries in this country. That's massive growth. It's kind of astounding, really hard to fathom the volume of food we're talking about. Okay, so in this future where food is being bought at supercenters, how does it work? Well, let's talk about the way something like Target works. Target has these regional distribution hubs. So they'll have one for Northern California. It's a massive warehouse, millions of square feet with all sorts of temperature zones. And what they do is they buy from wholesalers to this distribution hub in Northern California, and then trucks go out to 50 or 100 Target stores. So the inventory for 100 Target stores is supplied by one hub, and when they buy food, they're buying it at the hub level. So the carrots that are on your shelf at Target are bought in enough quantity for a single distribution hub. They go to that hub, and then trucks take them to 50 Target stores. So 10 years from now, if that's where our food is being bought, the producers that are winning in that system are the ones that are producing at massive scale. It's people like the industrial farms in the Central Valley of California that are making millions of pounds of carrots a day. And it's companies like Kraft and General Mills that are producing food at real scale, food products. Okay, that's future number one. Let's talk about future number two. And without passing judgment on any of these, after we present the futures, we could talk about the benefits of each. Future number two, I'd like to paint a picture, a thought experiment. In 10 years, 10% of the food that we buy comes from local food systems. And this is actually different. A lot of times you'll hear talk of imagining a future where we get our food from local food systems, and usually the debate is, can we get all of our food from local food systems? Can we feed ourselves entirely from food that's produced in our food shed? It's an interesting question, but let's talk about something else, which is, can local food systems grow 10 times from what they are today, from 1% to 10%, and still be a small minority of the food that we buy? Such a scenario would be a huge change from where we are today. And you have to imagine that it would actually significantly impact the other 90%. The national food system and the international food system would really have to respond to a much larger local food system that's starting to move tens of billions or even $100 billion of food a year. So what would that look like? How can we imagine it? Let's talk about three parts of a food system: the production, the distribution, and then the retail. So on the production side, there's a growing consensus in people who really think about local food systems, people who've thought about this more than I have, who say that there's a kind of company that's going to serve that future, which is farms in the middle or ags in the middle. Ag in the middle. These are mid-sized food companies. They employ between 10 and 100 people. They make between $1 million and $10 million in sales. It's a mid-sized food company. This kind of food company doesn't really exist today. They're starting to exist more and more, but there's very few of them. If you actually go back 50 years, the majority of the food that we bought in any given city was being produced by these mid-sized food companies. But today, it's either massive national companies or it's very small operations of 1 to 2 people. So imagine a future 10 years from now where these 10 to 100 person companies are producing food, and they're producing it for a specific city or for a specific food shed where they're located. There's a few of them starting to grow today. In 10 years, if we see more of them, it's probably the result of existing very small food companies, including farms and ranches, scaling up. Let's talk about the distribution, the middle part. What does this look like if local food systems grow 10x? It probably means a lot more hubs and trucks. Hubs, so these are the warehouses with refrigeration space where food is aggregated, and trucks, sometimes refrigerated trucks that are taking food from point A to point B. At the national level, you're talking about massive warehouses and trucks. On the local food system, you're talking about a lot more instances of these warehouses, but they're much, much smaller. And you're talking about having them in rural areas, in urban areas. You're starting to see the seeds of this today with more commercial kitchens, more storage space, more independent trucking companies. In 10 years, if and when local food systems grow 10 times over, there's going to be a lot more companies. In this city, we could imagine a few startups that are doing local food trucking that don't exist today that are going to succeed 10 years from now. In terms of retail, local food systems need to be competitive with the convenience of a supercenter. And that's hard because supercenters are really, really convenient. You go there and everything you need is in one spot. And actually the way that local food systems are going to compete in convenience is by coming to you. So you're actually going to see a lot more instances of local food retail. Imagine today that you're buying local food at farmers markets and there's CSA subscription programs, and sometimes you see pop-up markets where a retailer will show up for just a few hours at a single place to sell their food. However you think about it, however you do the math, either there's going to be 10 times more of those, or the existing spots are going to double in throughput and there's going to be 5 times more of them. However you do the math, there's going to be a lot more places to buy local food, and that's going to be great. It's going to be in your office lobby, it's going to be at your school, it's going to be in your church and community center, it's going to be at the corner store near your house. There's going to be lots of opportunities to buy local food. Okay, so here we are today. We see these two futures. Either one could exist based on the seeds today. Let's talk about the benefits of each. And there are real benefits to each. In the case of future number 1, where we're buying our food at supercenters, food is much cheaper, unquestionably. And as a result, it's more accessible and there's fewer people going hungry. One could argue. I'd also argue that in future number 1, we're actually making more efficient use of the distribution resources. The warehouses and the trucks are being optimally used. It's the sort of thing that you can do when you really centralize business intelligence and you centralize space. Those are real benefits. Let's talk about the benefits of a local food system growing 10x. I think there are 3 big ones to talk about. One is human health. Local food is healthier. It's more nutrient dense, and most importantly, you don't find highly processed food products in local food systems. It's very hard to produce locally produced high fructose corn syrup or locally produced maltodextrin. Those things don't exist, and as a result, the products that you're buying are much less processed and much fresher and much healthier for you. And it's something that's pretty widely recognized, and you'll find the USDA coming out with statements that local food systems are actually an antidote to the obesity epidemic in this country, something that can have significant impact. Benefit number 2 is the health of our land. And this is the environment more broadly, but very specifically, the soil and the land in this country is being rapidly eroded in value by industrial farming techniques. And what you find in local food systems is much more sustainable agriculture that's better for the land. It's really important. Benefit number 3, this is something that's much more nebulous. So the first 2 are pretty tangible. You can track those. The third benefit to local food systems is cultural. And it's a very deep sense of empowerment when you know where your food is coming from. When you have a face to the farmer or the rancher or the baker who's making your food, when you see yourself as part of a natural cycle as opposed to a consumer of something that's just produced by a factory, it's extremely enfranchising. And it has deep cultural impact. So just a brief personal note here about how I see myself as an entrepreneur. I see these 2 narratives. I very clearly want to live in a scenario that's like world number 2, where local food systems grow 10x. I think that's a better future. And I have this image in my head of what it means to be an entrepreneur, of the way waves are formed. So when waves crash on the shore in San Francisco, it's usually the result of a big storm that happened in the middle of the ocean thousands of miles away. And this storm is pouring energy into the ocean, and the ocean is actually a great conductor of energy. And so it forms these waves that travel thousands of miles. And I see entrepreneurship as something very similar, where you can actually pour energy, your own energy, your creative energy, you can summon energy, resources of those around you, and pour it into the world, and put your energy behind a narrative, and want a future that you want to see happen. And it's a very blunt instrument. You can't detail the specifics of how the future is going to look. But you can try to accelerate a narrative that's already happening. And so with our company, Good Eggs, we're really trying to do that. We've created this mission to grow and sustain local food systems so that we see this future of 10% of our food coming from local sources. Thanks very much.